The Air Force One is Nike's top-selling athletic sneaker of all time. But the iconic shoe was never a part of Nike's long-term plan. In fact, after releasing the Air Force One in 1982, Nike planned to cancel the line altogether.
That end date was thwarted by a group of retailers in Baltimore who was so thoughtful just in terms of what Air Force One has become today. They were just really looking at supply and demand for their consumers in their own enclave of the country.
Here's how the Air Force One went from a 2-year limited release to a multi-generational fashion staple. This is Suddenly Obsessed. The first pair of Air Force Ones were released in 1982 and designed by this guy, Bruce Kilgore. Kilgore was tasked with creating the first basketball shoe to utilize Nike's innovative Air technology.
And he worked with a group of individuals that included aerospace engineers and designers and just tons of folks that were extremely adept at what we do here.
At the time, there were two main athletic sneakers that basketball players wore on the court, Converse and Adidas. So when Nike announced it was releasing a new basketball shoe, it was a big deal.
When Nike came with the Nike Air Force One, it switched over. Like, it just was a better looking shoe. It was better constructed for the game of basketball, and guys started to gravitate to that particular shoe, and they just never looked back.
I could just, remember and see in my mind's eye as a young kid, like wanting to get that shoe and wanting to be like those guys that were wearing it, because ultimately it represented the pinnacle of innovation and technology for basketball at that point.
The shoes were originally priced at $89.95, which would be about $250 today. In 1982, that was a heavy price tag for a pair of sneakers, but the AF1 was an immediate hit with elite basketball players. Moses Malone and Michael Cooper were two of the first major NBA stars to sport the Air Force One. And while Malone won the 1983 championship while wearing Air Force Ones, there was a much bigger movement happening in the streets, specifically in the era's hottest basketball city at the time, Baltimore. In 1982 and 83, Baltimore was home to what was widely seen as the greatest high school basketball team of all time, Dunbar High School's championship basketball team.
Well, basketball was just the sport for Baltimore City as a whole, and that's what we did.
So it isn't surprising that Baltimore retailers were left in disbelief when Nike announced the cancellation of the Air Force One in 1984.
We really didn't see a reason why they were canceling the shoe out.
Nike's spirit of constant reinvention guided the company's decision to discontinue the Air Force One, but Baltimore retailers couldn't ignore local demand for the shoe, and that is where Harold Rudo comes in.
And Harold Rudo just decided that something had to be done about it. And that's when he decided to call Bruce Kilgore, and then they basically said that it was a shoe that they weren't going to make anymore. They were going to the Air Force Two. In Baltimore City, we couldn't accept that.
Rudo worked with two fellow retailers to craft an exclusive distribution plan for Baltimore. Then, he flew to Nike's headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon to meet with their executive team. The Baltimore retailers agreed to sell 3,000 pairs of Air Force Ones through their stores, which included Charlie Rudo Sports, Cinderella Shoes, and Downtown Locker Room.
They called themselves the Three Amigos.
After a successful test run, the retailers raised the stakes by ordering Air Force Ones in new colorways.
The explosion of the shoe came when Harold, Paul Blinken, and Tony Tranners decided to do something they call the colors.
The original white and silver Air Force Ones came in a high top and low top version. One of the first color combinations the Baltimore retailers tried was a white chocolate shoe with a brown strap.
And I think the colors that he was requesting early on was a very interesting opportunity that we probably wouldn't have saw.
When we got the first couple of colors, everybody had to have it right away. They wanted to be the first one with it. So you could look outside 2 days before the actual date of that shoe coming out, and it was already starting to line up with anticipation.
The Baltimore retailers created unprecedented demand by dropping Color of the Month Air Forces. That influenced Nike's distribution strategy forever, a strategy that lives on through the brand's sneakers app today. Once word spread about Baltimore's Color of the Month drops, customers would travel from states along the I-95 corridor to get a pair of Air Forces.
I think the beauty of the Color of the Month Club was that it was specific to Harold and those guys in that area, and that made people have to travel, that made people have to find them, and then that creates a chase unto itself.
Rudo's Color of the Month experiment not only influenced Nike's distribution model, but it changed the trajectory of the Air Force One forever. Where the shoe was initially released as athletic footwear, it quickly morphed into a fashion staple.
The roots of this company is based in sport performance. And, I think this notion of sneakers as a lifestyle opportunity was somewhat by happenstance.
By the mid-1990s, Air Force Ones gained a permanent spot on the Nike roster. The iconic white-on-white Air Force Ones as we know them today were released in 1992, and shortly after, a second wave of cultural influence catapulted the Air Force One to what it is today.
Hip-hop and Air Force Ones are synonymous. They're interconnected. They have a symbiotic relationship, and you can look at the trajectory of both, and they're aligned. When you think about a guy like DJ Clark Kent, take a guy who is credited with really getting Jay-Z to take rap seriously. He's a guy that was really, really working closely to the late Notorious B.I.G. He's one of the architects of modern hip-hop, but he's more known for being an aficionado globally for Air Force One.
As Air Force Ones became popular along the I-95 corridor, so too did hip-hop, especially in New York City. One of Nike's first limited Air Force One releases was a 1996 shoe with a New York City logo. New York even had its own nickname for the Air Force One, Uptowns. But the origins of Air Force One's relationship with hip-hop is deeper than that. In 1988, DJ Easy Rock wore a pair of Air Force Ones on the cover of the iconic hip-hop album It Takes Two. And throughout the 90s and early 2000s, artists continued to honor the Air Force One in their style and music. In Jay-Z's 2000 song, Parking Lot Pimpin', he raps, "Especially when you're sitting on 20s, they get nauseous, standing in the azure with the white Air Forces." And in 2005, Jeezy raps, "I went from old school Chevys to drop-top Porsches. You couldn't walk a mile off in my Air Forces." But Nelly's 2002 hit single Air Force Ones took it to another level.
That is still today probably the biggest maybe ode to Air Force One that, as soon as you hear the name, you just go right there. So I think it had a major effect on what that shoe represented, and it opened it up to more consumers as well.
In the 3 years following the release of Nelly's Air Force Ones, Nike saw sales of the shoe reach new heights. Sports One source analyst Matt Powell told the New York Times that an estimated 12 million pairs of Air Force Ones were sold at their peak in 2005, and those numbers remained above the 10 million mark in the 2 years following. Nike has found ways to return the love. Over the years, they've released special edition Air Forces stamped with some of hip-hop's biggest record labels like Rockefeller, Shady Records, and Terror Squad. But while hip-hop became the prominent cultural driving force behind Air Force Ones, the shoe still had life on the basketball court. Former NBA star and Philadelphia native Rasheed Wallace endorsed Air Force Ones throughout his career.
For Rasheed, that was his competitive advantage, to wear a shoe that he loved, and obviously we know what he's been able to do in his career, so it worked very well for him.
And Rasheed isn't the only modern basketball legend who left their mark on the court with Air Force Ones.
There's a video of Kobe Bryant playing in Air Force Ones at Rucker Park, where he put on one of the most amazing street ball performances that we've ever seen.
The Air Force One continues to reign supreme as a fashion shoe. Since releasing the original Air Force One in 1982, Nike has developed over 2,000 color expressions of the shoe, some costing well into the thousands of dollars. And Nike continues to reinvent the Air Force One by collaborating with cultural heavyweights to give the classic Air Force One style a new life. In 2007, Nike created a limited edition crocodile skin Air Force One for its 25th anniversary, which at $2,000 became the most expensive Nike shoe to sell at retail. As street style gained mass appeal, Nike created limited drops with brands like Just Dawn and Off-White. They've even created special styles with leading artists of the times like Cause. Most recently, hip-hop has continued to carry on its love affair with Air Force Ones through young rappers like Travis Scott. Between Baltimore, basketball, and hip-hop, Nike realizes just how much recognition the black community deserves for its influence on sneaker culture.
When the streets adopt something, sometimes you have no control over it. So you just have to be able to serve in a way that is indicative of what the streets is asking for.
For the Air Force One's 35th anniversary in 2007, the brand found ways to honor the shoe's unique origins. Nike dropped a limited edition Be More shoe to honor the Air Force One's Baltimore roots. The black and gold shoe was sold exclusively at Downtown Locker Room with a press release stating, "Without Baltimore, the Air Force One might have faded out of existence." In 2020, the Air Force One is as popular as ever. Influencers like Hailey Bieber sport the crisp, white, low tops on their Instagram posts, and famous TikTokers often wear the white low-top Air Force Ones in their popular dance videos. That multi-generational appreciation is one of the reasons Nike says the Air Force One continues to be a bestseller.
At my station in life, I still wear Air Force Ones every day, just about. The interesting piece is my 12-year-old daughter has her own relationship with Air Force Ones as well. And that's just a testament to everyone has maybe their own context and or relationship. And it, again, spans generations and as a barrier breaker in many regards.
The NPD Group told Footwear News that the Air Force One was the top-selling sneaker of 2020. And if history tells us anything, it's likely to stay that way for decades to come.